Hello everyone, I am Mustansar Siam from Lahore, Pakistan, and I am joined by Victor Ofosu from London, United Kingdom, to discuss his book, The Demise of Arms Control, Propaganda of the Deed, and War Termination Strategies. Victor Ofosu is a London-based author, independent researcher, and an expert in arms control and international security. Thank you so much, Victor Ofosu, for joining me.
Thank you, brother. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. My first question is, can you provide us with a brief and concise understanding of the propaganda of the deed, as it has traditionally been understood in academic analysis?
Okay, from the academic perspective, propaganda of the deed is defined as the use of violent deed to subvert government policies or to force people to act, or population or target audience to act favorably.
Okay.
That is in the
Uh,
context of war and non-combatant activities and engagement.
okay. How does your research challenge the traditional linear interpretation of the propaganda of the deed? And what potential
Okay,
benefits do you see in expanding its application in other academic fields?
okay. So the definition of propaganda of the deed has two elements to it. Right? So that's the first element is the violent action. The second element is the message, right? So these two goes hand in hand, right? The time interval between the action and the message being transmitted is also crucial. Now, within current academics and my analysis, we agree on both applications of both aspects. But what I'm saying in my definition is that propaganda of the deed has a psychological underpinning, right? And the psychological underpinning, I connect to Pavlov's conditions experiment, which I argue that the use of propaganda of the deed, since it's being used to change people's behavior and cognitive behavior, there has to be a conditional approach to it. So I argue that there's a propaganda of the deed is actually the use of violent deeds to condition a population or a target audience to act favorably. So this is the difference between my definition, which I coined, and current academic definition. Now, regarding the question of its application, current application, and what makes it unique, what I'm saying is that propaganda of the deed prior 1800s during its inception was basically applied by non-state actors. Now, so these non-state actors were anarchists, currently terrorist organizations, right? But from my definitions and from my analysis, I'm saying no, that is a linear approach of adopting or applying the concept. So we need to look at the non-linear approach of the theory. So that's a shift from the traditional analysis of academia to a new way of thinking that the states can also employ that strategy, right, to win
Exactly.
a war as a war termination strategy, whereby such strong deeds or activities or violent deeds can be used to change the aggressor's behavior in war or in the battlefield, or perhaps not in war. Depending on its application or where it's applied.
Okay. Can you provide us an example of a state using propaganda of the deed as a war termination strategy, particularly in recent conflicts?
And in recent warfare, maybe Afghan warfare, Iraqi warfare, we haven't had the extreme application of my description of propaganda of the deed, according to my investigation. But then, if you look at Japan, the Second World War, the Hiroshima Nagasaki bombing with the atomic bomb, that was a deed. Some might argue that it was use of nuclear weapons, which a terror action by a state, but it was a deed because that deed, with the deed came the message, right? And the message obviously translates to fear, influence people's cognitive, people's beliefs and makes them angry. The application, the attachments of fear. right, and subdues them in engaging in war, and obviously changing the morale or demoralizing the soldiers, right? So that is one example of it. The Doolittle's raid, 1942, also is an example. We also have the Vietnam War, where this approach was used by the United States to then force the Vietnamese to enter into a negotiation agreement to end the war. So these are some of the applications in our history.
Okay. How do emotional events on the battlefield affect war termination?
Emotions. Okay, so war. When you're talking about war, you have to talk about the body, you have to talk about the mind, and you have to talk about the soul. Now, these
Exactly.
three things go hand in hand, and soul is also connected with the spirit. If you agree. Now, when you're looking at the mind, you talk about the feelings, the anger, the endurance, and the soldier has to go through. But also in war, without digressing, you also have to understand that you have the people, you have the state, then you have the generals, right? The people are with passion, right? The people making up the army, the soldiers. Then the general with the courage, right? A general with courage, the leader, right? Without the courage, will reduce the morale of the soldiers, right? So these emotional dynamics are relevant. Now, in the war settings, if you're using propaganda over deed, right, you basically demoralizing them by using these actions, right? So you remove the confidence of the general, right? Then the
Mhm.
passion of the population, which is the soldiers, you also remove that, right? And you're
Exactly.
seeking a total annihilation of the army. So this is the application. So it has to do with demoralizing them, right, through the use of violent action. So this is my understanding. Obviously, the role of feelings in connection with pride, in connection with victory, right? From winning a war for one's nation. All these things are all uh, psychologically inclined. Therefore, if you apply propaganda of the deed according to my definition, right, then you remove the ability for this person or the individuals or the soldiers to have that thinking, have that glorification of the thinking that they are going to win the war to glorify the state, right?
Exactly.
Then it leads to a situation whereby you demoralize them, they enter into a state of depression. Then you have a situation whereby you are going to force them to either enter into a negotiation agreement or to end the war.
Exactly. How do you see the role of the propaganda of the deed evolving in modern warfare?
I think this is a very interesting this is a very interesting question. Um, I would say today there's a talk of nuclear weapons, right? There's talk of let me make it easy. Let me make it easy. So Pakistan and India enters into a war. India has a bigger population when compared to in comparison to Pakistan,
Pakistan.
right?
Exactly.
We both live in this tension between both states, right?
Yes.
Obviously, both live in an anarchist system, which obviously leads to disagreements and tensions within the state, right? So, in a scenario where there's a war between these two states, Pakistan knows that its manpower, its technology is less advanced when compared with India. Therefore, the application of this strategy they will need to apply this strategy to basically force the population in India to say no to entering into a war, or no to proceed in the war, or no or yes to an agreement to terminate the war. So then, the use of nuclear power. right? Strategically or non-strategically, probably limited nuclear warfare could be applied. But use of nuclear power, right, will and the deed, the explosion, the deed that follows with the use of the nuclear weapon, right, and the message that follows, right, will then force India and its population to say, okay, we're not going into this war because of loss of prestige on the international stage, right? Or loss of casualties. So this is a good example.
Yeah,
What do
exactly.
you think?
Exactly. I agree with. Okay, my last question is about your book, The Demise of Arms Control. The effectiveness of arms control agreements has been a subject of debate, has been a subject of much scholarly attention over the past few decades. What are some of the key arguments you discuss in your book regarding the criticisms of arms control agreement, and how do you address them in your academic analysis?
So the book uses von Stein and Simmons analysis of constraints and compliance to control. And according to my analysis, I look at the domestic security and economic implication of entering into an agreement. Then in my book, I also argue that a state using North Korea as an example, the six-party talk, which I obviously elaborately wrote about, I analyzed my analysis basically stated that North Korea will not reverse its nuclear posture. Why? Because reversal will affect its security. In a sense that
Exactly.
if they reverse their nuclear position, what happens is that the issue of U.S. attack first strike is a question that we need to analyze. So they wouldn't do that. Then there's the economic aspect of it. Then there's international prestige. So there's various factors. But then again, I argue that certain states will enter into negotiation and sign an agreement not to use nuclear weapons or to reverse the nuclear posture. But that will be dependent on again international prestige, credibility, and reputation on the international stage. But this is limited when there's changes within the international system. That state will change its position and then reverse back to becoming a nuclear state. So again, in the case of Pakistan and India, which is a very good example, United States might force Pakistan to enter into NPT or other agreements or completely reverse its nuclear position. But then at the stage where Pakistan feels threatened by India's aggression, although you sign the contract or sign an agreement to reverse, right, you will reverse back to becoming a nuclear state. So what we're
Exactly.
saying is that states agree to treaties temporarily, but not for the long term. So this is one
Exactly.
aspect of the book. Another aspect of the book also talks about war termination and war termination strategy, and where in that area I argue that the states all the people, the population, right, have a key in terminating wars, especially nuclear war, if we have a situation. Now, if the people are against the nuclear war, then the states will have to reverse using nuclear power against in defense of their sovereignty, right? Okay, then I also argue that within the international system, right, the international community may force a state
Exactly.
to reverse its position, right?
Exactly.
But depending on the environmental condition at the time, the state will choose or may not choose to adhere to those conditions enforced by the international community. So this is the central arguments in the book.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Ofosu. I really appreciate you coming on for this short interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.